Hello, my name is Neil Davidson and I'm the founder of Raw Umber Studios. Welcome to another online portrait drawing session. This video mimics the structure of a regular life drawing class. We'll show you 3 photographs on the screen, one for 10 minutes, one for 20 minutes and one for 30 minutes, and it's your job to draw the photograph that you see. Lizet will be joining us. She'll be doing a demonstration in the bottom corner of the screen and giving hints and tips. Once you've finished, don't forget to post your work to Instagram and hashtag it with #RawUmberLive. Right, let's get started.
Hello everyone and welcome to another Raw Umber video. This week we've got a very nice model I'm very excited about, so let's get started. So I use a compressed charcoal as well as a putty rubber and a stump and my fingers for rubbing into the paper. Now these are the materials that I use. It's completely up to you if you'd like to use it or use your own material. But if you'd like to use the materials that I use, we've put links in the description box below the video. Alright, so I'm going to start by putting my model down on the paper. And this is completely arbitrary. It's just where I want him. And then I'm going to measure using those 2 marks. So the first line I put in is the center line. And this line is the line that goes from the middle of his forehead to in between his eyes, to the middle of his nose, to the middle of his chin. It's always good to make sure that you don't hold your pencil like this, because this is really good for small lines like that. They're very precise, but it also makes sure that you press into the paper. So I always try to hold my pencil more like this, and that helps me get strong straight lines, which is a little easier for sketching in. So just measuring with my thumb, now divided it up into 3/3. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to find the width of his skull. So when I look at the center line to the outside, I see that as being almost the same as his nose to the bottom of his chin. So I'm going to put that in first. Now that side of his head will follow the center line because the front of your face is pretty much all in the same direction, and we'll cut into that later. And then in order to be able to cut out into it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the widest point of his face, and I see that as being the exact midpoint of that center line. And from there I use that straight line I've put down to see what sort of angles his face has. So I see quite a strong slope for his forehead and then a sort of more tapered slope for his jaw. Okay, so next what I'm going to do is now I've got everything in terms of where his head is, I'm going to try and put his features in. So the first third of his face, I'm going to just divide them into thirds again, and then the top third will be his top lip. So I'm always generally measuring with halves or thirds, just because I find that easy to do, but you might find it helps you as well. Same thing for the middle third. I see his eye line being about 2/3 up from there. And the top of his nose 1/3, so that we can just give a light bit of shadow there, just to indicate that it's going downwards. And I do the same thing for that big plane of his eyes. So now I've got some placeholders in, I'm going to try and start being a little bit more specific. So for instance, I see his corners of his mouth about halfway. So I'm going to put those in. And one thing to note is that generally the mouth slopes downwards. So it's sort of rounded and not just a flat line. And you can also see that I'm using very, very light pressure at the start, and then I increase the pressure as I'm more sure of my lines. And this is to make sure that I can still erase what I need to without any problems. Especially with charcoal, this is important because it can really stain your paper. And now for the top third of his face, I also divide it up into 3 thirds, and the top third is his hairline. So I'm just going to quickly sketch in a tone for his hair. So already with these few shapes, I've already got a nice sense of that he's looking up, the sense of what his face, the shapes of his face, that sort of thing. So that's been quite successful. And next what I'm going to do is I'm going to break those places down a little bit more like I did with the mouth. So I found the corners of the eyes which line up with just the side of the nose there. And that's also where the brow starts. And you can see the darkest bit of the brow is sort of a triangle shape, narrow at the bottom, wide at the top. And then lastly, what I can start doing is use those same principles of shape to address more of his nose and more of his eyes. Okay, so that's how far we can get on the 10-minute pose. Let's see how far we can get on the 20 and 30-minute pose. And I'm going to use the same technique of shapes and planes and measuring, but try and push it a little bit further. Alright, so here we are for the second pose, the 20-minute one. And again, I'm going to start by placing his head on the paper. I'm looking for his center line and his top and bottom line. And some people were asking about placements of the box a few weeks ago. So I just want to sort of get a bit more into that. In the 10-minute pose, we had a front box, so it wasn't really 3D. But in this case, in his profile, we see a lot of the side and the front plane of his head. So what I tend to do is look at the top bit of his brow. You see that it's sloping down? That you can use as an indicator of the box. It could also be the corners of his eyes, or both sides of his nose, or both corners of his mouth. But in this case, we see the tops of his brows. So that's what I'm going to use. And next, if you take that same line, top of his brow, and look how it slopes towards the top of his ear, that's the second line, and that's the side of the box. So on him, very, very clearly, you can see a highlight on his forehead. That's where the box turns. So a highlight is usually on a place where it turns just towards the light. And when I measure, I see that that forehead is fits about 2 times into the side plane. So that's what I'm going to do, 1, 2, and 3. So now I know how big the front plane is and how big the side plane is. And like we now did in the 10-minute video, you can divide the face up into 3/3 and look for that center line. And now I've done that, what I can do is do the same like I did in the 10-minute pose, just have an indication of the bottom of the nose, the top lip, the lower lip with a bit of shadow. This time, however, they stick out a little bit off the plane of the box because they are further out. So I always tend to think of drawing more like sculpting. Imagine you've got a big box of clay now, and what are you going to push in and what are you going to pull out? Another way to help me with this pushing is to look at a general line from the tip of his nose to the back of his forehead and back of his chin. If I get those 2 lines right, that usually helps me a lot with the likeness. And you can see that line carved into the chin a little bit. Another place where you can really start carving in is his brow. Brows overhang the face, so you can sort of carve in there and just shade that a little bit, and you can see it gets a sense of that we've chopped a little bit out of that box. What I then usually do for the side of the box, I put a cross to find the middle, and the ear then lines up between it below his brow and above the bottom of his ear. So behind that cross, below his brow and above his nose. Sorry, not ear, nose. And then I can start shading in his hair. And of course, his skull is not actually a box, it's actually round, and I can draw that on top. And in fact, I don't even draw these boxes in all the time. It's just a nice way of thinking of the skull that helps me a lot with keeping structure even when somebody's in an odd angle. So next I'm gonna put in the nose, and I imagine my tool, my rubber, to be the tool that adds clay. If you can imagine, this is a sculpture, and my pencil as the thing that takes it away and carves into it. And you can see how this doesn't look flat already. It already looks like you could touch it a little bit. And that's the whole point of drawing like this, because often portraits can end up looking very flat and very drawn, and that actually kills the realism of this. So having these box methods for me always really helped. And I'm just going to clean this up a little bit, but also now we've got the skull, it's very easy to just add some hair. Okay, so now I've got a generalized idea of what's going on, and I'm going to try and break that down a little bit more. So for instance, his mouth is actually, his chin sticks out a little bit further. So what I do is I take his mouth back a little bit and add a little bit for his chin. And this sort of stuff you can do for a very long time. And just these small changes will make your portrait look like the person that you're drawing. The eye socket, again, like I did in the 10-minute pose, I'm using that side of the nose to figure out where the eye starts. Like we did in the 10-minute pose, the mouth goes down at the corners of the mouth. So generally, if something is going towards the light, I will make it white. And if something is turning away from the light, I will make it dark. And what I can do next is carve in a little bit of light in between his brows, for instance, and start looking for where his eye is. And generally with eyes, you can see there are two squares on the sides of his eye socket. There's one square in the inner corner and one square in the outer corner. So those are really, really important because they show you where his eye is located. And then it's just a matter of drawing smaller shapes on top. So we've got the two squares on the out and the inside, and we've got the lower area, that's the lower lid. And then I can carve in and, for instance, put that light on the top of his lower lid that's turning towards the light source. And then what I can do is take that sort of finish into the other features. So I rub in with my finger to make a soft edge for the nose, for instance, and I'm going to do the same for the lip. And this sort of technique is the basis of anything that I'm going to draw. I always work with shadow shapes, just looking at them separately and then going in and adding darker accents, lighter accents. And that gives me a really structured way to tackle anything and simplify it, which is so important because when you do a landscape or a portrait, there's so many different things to draw. And if you want to try and draw everything in, it's just impossible, especially in a shorter post like this. So this is a way I simplify things that are complex to see and then still get a feeling of what I'm actually drawing. Okay, so I'm gonna continue on this for a little bit and I will see you in a 30-minute pose. Okay, last pose. We've got a little bit more time, but I'm going to try and push this a little bit further, so I'm going to be a bit quicker with the box. So I'm going to start with placing, center line, measuring how big the side plane is versus the front plane, and then dividing the face up into thirds. And like I said before, you don't actually have to draw in the box every time. It's just good to have this in the back of your head when you're drawing, so it helps you figure out where everything's placed and how to keep structure in a portrait. So I've used the angle of the brow and the angle of the ear to the brow to make a box, and now I can put a cross into that side of the box and place the ear the same way we did for the 20-minute pose. And of course carving in, so anything that's going down away from the light will be dark, anything that goes up towards the light will be light. And I'm just going to carve in into that front of the box, because of course that's not actually a flat plane, it actually goes in and out. And once I've got all those things in, I can start refining those things that I carved out or carved in. For instance, getting rid of the bridge of the nose using a bit of rubber and starting to refine a little bit. And once I've got an idea about where I've got everything placed and I'm starting to refine things a little bit, what I like to do is go in with my rubber with my finger or the stump and just sort of gently rub some of this in. And what this does is it gives you a sense of that stuff is turning softly, so it feels a little bit more organic instead of very sculptural. And it also makes things a little bit darker, so it helps with differentiating between the shadow and the light. And this is a very important concept that's actually really hard to grasp. Contrast is what makes you look at something. Contrast is what's going to give you that, oh, look across the room, what's that? And that's what you want in a painting or drawing. So it's always good to go really dark and really light in the same artwork. But at the same time, you don't want to overdo it and get very bitty. So it's very hard to differentiate between big expanse of light and big expanse of dark, but still keep that contrast going. So generally what I do is I try to squint at my picture a lot. And what's good about that is that all the small details will get sort of blown away. They don't really pop out quite as much, and you can just see the big dark shapes. Just going to do the same thing for the nose as well. Another thing you might see me do is that generally the darks concentrate on the edge of the shadow and not in the middle. And the reason for that is that's where the shadow is usually darkest. So I'm quite happy with the structure of it. You can see, for instance, where his skull would be if I drew that in like that. And that's really useful because then when you know where his skull is, you can place the hair on top. And hair is more voluminous or less voluminous depending on who you have sitting for you. But one thing that's really important, that's something I see sometimes, is that the hair should always lay on top of the skull. It has a little bit of volume and not just like glued on top, because that looks a little bit unnatural. So always make sure that you are aware of where the skull is and then add hair on top of that. Just refine the mouth. Also with the mouth, same thing with the rest of the face as well. It turns around, so it's going to likely be a little bit shorter on the right side than it is on the left side. And like I said, in a 20-minute pose, the mouth generally goes down at the corners and up towards the middle, but then the little point of the lip also goes down. So you often have a little point, goes up, and then corners that go down, and then finally the very, very corners go up again. Just going to shade in the neck and the ears and that sort of thing. So now we're getting to the part where for me the fun starts. So what I try to do is now I've got these shadows and I've got these lights. What I try to do is carve in with my rubber where I see sharp highlights or sharp edges, and then I rub in with my finger where I see more softer transitions. And the difference between the two, having them placed next to each other, is what gives your drawing its interest. Little note about the eyes. When you're drawing the eyes or even the pupils, just draw over whatever you've drawn already and just make sure that they're round. So draw two spheres, and that helps with just giving that sense of roundness to the eyes. It may look weird at the start, but then if you put like your shadow shapes on top of that and get rid of some of the sphere, then it will start looking more like an eye. And like I said in the 20-minute post, this is basically the secret to all drawing. It's always just shadow shapes and then getting those shapes right and then looking for your hard and your soft edges. And when you do that, that applies to painting, it applies to gouache, it applies to most media. Watercolor is a little bit different, but the same principles apply, just the techniques are a little bit different. So this is basically all you need to know, but just doing it well, that's where the practice comes in. So don't be discouraged if you feel like it's not going well one day or the next. This is just very normal. You can't always be amazing. So just keep going. And the most important thing is that you enjoy it. So you do it more. And when you do it more, you practice more. And when you practice more, you get better. So that's the main thing. Okay, so we're at the end of the last pose. Hopefully you all enjoyed yourself and felt like you learned something. Neil's going to post a hashtag, so don't forget to hashtag your work on Instagram. And if you're interested, on Wednesday I'm doing a figure drawing with some shadow shapes as well. So if you're interested, sign up for that.
Thank you for taking part. Don't forget to photograph your work and post it on Instagram and hashtag it with #RawUmberLive. I'd like to thank Lizet Dingemans for drawing along with us today, and you can download the photographs you've seen in this week's session from the link I'm about to show you on the screen. We run figure drawing sessions every Wednesday at 8 p.m. and portrait drawing sessions every Sunday at 2 p.m. You can also view previous week's sessions on our website.